for being here. A special thank you to Dr. Noel Trent and the Museum of African American History for hosting us. And on a more personal note, it is a joy to be back at the very place where I married my husband. We're days away from our 11th wedding anniversary. I actually brought a picture from our wedding here. But it certainly is, the museum is a source of personal pride for so many reasons. I'm so proud that you call the Massachusetts 7th in the city of Boston your home, and I'm so grateful for the space that you have created, safe space, which in and of itself in this moment feels radical and essential to fight for. I'll be brief because I want to hear from all of you, and I'll have some questions to help guide our listening session this morning. Again, it is an honor to be amongst so many cultural icons, the folks that make art and history come alive for our communities each and every day. However, the prompt for today's convening is a sombering one. It is a sobering one, rather. The Trump administration has stepped up attacks on anything he and his administration don't like, including historical facts. I mean, just the denial of empirical data. This has been a coordinated and unrelenting attack on the freedom to learn, a coordinated and unrelenting attack on our shared history. So, you know, again, I'm grateful to each and every one of you for being here today. You know, the most effective way for us to beat a dictator, and I do believe Donald Trump is a dictator, is with defiance. That means at every turn we have to resist and reject this dark, dystopian, discriminatory vision that he has for our country. Again, this is the latest in a long attempt to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion, to whitewash our shared history by erasing the contributions of women, people of color, and other marginalized communities, and to set us back decades, if not centuries. I do really believe that this moment is not about how to simply weather the next 4 years of the Trump administration. It will dictate and determine the next 100 years for our country. And that is why, again, we are not going to accept any of these lawless actions, and they are lawless. It is an abuse and an overreach of executive authority. That we are not accepting any of these as inevitabilities. And so our best defensive strategy, of course, is litigation, and I'm certainly leveraging every tool available to me as a member of Congress, which we'll get more into in a moment. So again, what brings us here today is a sobering prompt in the frame of an executive order entitled, of all things, Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. In Washington, Trump has gone out of his way to attack Smithsonian museums, particularly the American Art Museum, the American Women's History Museum, and our beloved Blacksonian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Again, it's infuriating and sad, but predictable and consistent. I have, in leveraging every tool available to me as a member of Congress to blunt the harms daily of this administration, one of my most recent actions is to demand an investigation by the Smithsonian's Inspector General. This is an action that I'm taking on in partnership with Congressman Paul Tonko of New York, who is a co-chair of the Museum Caucus. If you were unaware that that exists, in the House of Representatives we have a Museum Caucus. Congressman Tonko is a co-chair of that caucus. I enlisted his partnership in this effort, and dozens of our colleagues have also signed on to that letter. Although many of the Inspector Generals have been fired and we have no watchdogs in Washington, the Inspector General for the Smithsonian, which was established in the 1800s as an independent, nonpartisan entity, they are still in place. And so we are demanding an investigation into Trump's discriminatory executive order that seeks to remove anything that is considered race-centered or dividing in its ideology. But while the attacks on the Smithsonian dominate national headlines for their brazenness and the special place those museums hold as our country's documentaries, I want to bring attention here. That history is essential. The Smithsonian is important. There is a reverberating, effect and chilling effect for all of our museums and art and cultural institutions, which is what brings us here today. Because what I want to do is bring attention to the Commonwealth, to the Massachusetts 7th, to the incredible assets that are represented around this table, and including those that will join us shortly. It was important to me to shine a light on the incredible impacts you each have made, to show exactly how Trump's executive orders and Elon's Doge cuts are attacking the very cultural institutions that have long deserved more support, not less. So I'm convening this listening session to do just that, to highlight your incredible work, to quantify and humanize the impact of these disastrous policy and budgetary decisions, and to send a message to anyone and everyone that Black history is American history, that women's history is American history, that AAPI history is American history, that LGBTQ plus history is American history, and no amount of censorship, whitewashing, or erasure will change that. Boston and the Commonwealth are home to an abundance of artists and visionaries, community builders and history makers. And one thing certainly the accurate history has shown us, and it's another reason why I believe that Donald Trump seeks to erase it, is that it has shown us how to resist tyranny. It has shown us how to combat terrorism. It has shown us how to overcome oppression. The actions of a dictator are those which seek to have a citizenry that is ignorant and uninformed, to have a citizenry that is indifferent to the suffering of its neighbors, to have a citizenry that is inactive, to silence voices that conflict with their worldview. You can deport people because you disagree with what they say, even though it's free speech. You can aim to gut and erode at our cultural institutions because you don't like what is presented. And again, this is empirical data. Donald Trump and anyone else are entitled to their opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And it is important that we have an accurate telling of history. And in fact, I think that is the most patriotic thing that you can fight to defend, is the accurate telling and the preservation of our history in its entirety, our shared history. So we're not going to sit idly by and let them undermine that history. So it's my pleasure to pass it now over to Dr. Trent to speak to the museum's impact, its past and its future, and again, just to hear from you as we make it clear that we value you, we value what you do, we value the stories you tell, and the lessons that you teach. So we'll begin with you, Dr. Trent.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Pressley. And it is appropriate that this convening happens in this room. We are in the African Meeting House of Boston, which is the oldest existing Black church building in the country. And this room, which we call the Susan Paul Room, has a storied history. It is here that when we educated the Black children on Beacon Hill, which was a historically Black neighborhood on the north side of the hill, when it was too hard to do it in people's homes, there was too many children, they came here. When abolitionists convened and strategized, they were in this room. And so this room, this space, has a rich legacy of talking about what's happening in American society and challenging that. We as an institution were started by a woman named Sue Bailey Thurman, who arrived in Boston in 1953 with her husband Howard Thurman, who would become the Dean of Marsh Chapel at Boston University. And as she was going through Boston, she had a question: where was the story and history of Black people? Because it was not marked anywhere. And so she began to walk around Beacon Hill, especially through her research, and created what is now known as the Black Heritage Trail. And then began to galvanize her neighbors to support her work. They would come together that there should be a museum here in Boston dedicated to African American history. They started to do activities as early as 1963, more formally formalized in 1967, and that included a presentation by Langston Hughes shortly before he passed away. And in 1972, they were formally incorporated. Now, what a lot of people don't know is in 1978, there was a meeting in Detroit, Michigan, I believe, let's see, where a group of Black museum professionals came together and said, we must form community. We must strategize, we must support each other in this work. And that organization would become the Association of African American Museums. Its first president is our very own Mr. E. Barry Gaither, and the first conference was held here in Boston. So when it comes to Boston and Black museums, we are essential, we are part of the history. We emerged as part of the civil rights movement. And so in this moment, we find ourselves challenged, but we know we are part of a much richer legacy. April 10th, we received an email that we had lost. Our grant, our $500,000 capacity building grant, had been terminated. I've only been with the museum since June 2023, and in June 2024, we were excited to receive this grant that would help us expand our student teaching and field trip experience. We were informed that we no longer serve the interests of the United States. To that, I must respectfully disagree. In this building on our properties, we have one building in Nantucket that precedes the existence of our country, built in 1774 by a formerly enslaved man. Here in this building, Frederick Douglass spoke. William Lloyd Garrison started an organization that would come to lead the dismantling of slavery in this country, known as the New England Anti-Slavery Society. Across the courtyard is the Abel Smith School, the first public school in this country built specifically for Black students, but in the 1850s, there was a case of a young girl, Sarah Roberts, whose father contested her not being able to build to her neighborhood schools. He would lose the case in the Massachusetts Supreme Court, but in 1954, during Brown versus Board of Education, that case would serve as a legal precedent. And as I mentioned before, our very founding and existence is rooted in preserving African American history in the midst of the civil rights movement. You see, we are not a footnote to American history. We are not an addendum. We are ingrained in the narrative, and you do not have a full picture of this country's story without us. So while we are disheartened by the loss of our funding, while we are disturbed and continue to be concerned with restrictions that are being put on the National Park Service, who has been a long-term partner of this organization, we will not be erased.
That's right.
And we will not give up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And you know, your what you just offered is also a reminder that in that history, that progress in this country has been realized through revolution, not just through a natural evolution. And again, that is another reason why it is important that that history, that accurate history, is preserved and those stories are told. I wonder, before we move on, could you speak a little bit, and I'm thinking about Boston and its 250th anniversary, and in particular the impact of that milestone in this moment with the funding when it comes to our parks or our cultural institutions, the impact on tourism. Could you speak a little bit just about your contributions outside of what you, educational enrichment, cultural preservation, history? I mean, I've been here many times for fireside chats and community meetings. The museum plays a central role in community. And again, as a part of the Freedom Trail, could you speak a little bit about that, just economic impact?
So our economic impact, like many museums, we feed the economic engine of our communities, right? Our museums are a key resource. The American Alliance of Museums has some really great stats on that. We participate in that. As people are coming to Boston between now and July of 2026, they just don't want to see one story. They want to see a multiplicity of stories and perspectives. And that is what we offer. Now, some people may say, well, you don't exist during 1776. However, the community that would come to form us did. And there are African Americans who were here since the city's founding that were part of this resistance. And so what we present is a different perspective. I have great peers in the other sites along the Freedom Trail who have enhanced their storytelling, but our lens is purposeful and deliberately different. And so we examine, why would someone of African descent percent perhaps choose to be a loyalist or choose to be a patriot or change loyalties throughout that time period. We know that Boston's tourism demographic is incredibly diverse. And so we have the opportunity to help them see that it's not just about the John Hancocks and John Adams and Samuel Adams, who we all love and appreciate, but it's also about the everyday people who made some sacrifices for a future they couldn't see, who were part of that debate. And one of the things that we fundamentally believe here in this organization is that because Boston is a harbor city and the people, the African Americans who lived here, were exchanging information along the wharf, perhaps they had a larger sense of identity and liberty. And instead of saying that they got their ideas of liberty from John Adams and John Hancock, perhaps they overheard it in conversation from sailors coming in from France, from Britain, and other parts of the world. What happens if we empower them with that level of autonomy and sophisticated thinking? How then can we think of our country in a more enhanced way, in a way that reflects the way we think about ourselves?
Powerfully stated. Thank you, Dr. Pressley. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to ask the Mass Cultural Council, and then feel free to expound upon whatever else you might like to offer, but could you speak to that point, not only within the context of the 250th anniversary, but just in general, the economic footprint of cultural institutions and the artists that contribute to them?
I'll start it off. My name is Mark Carroll, the chair of the Government Mass Cultural Council. And first of all, thank you for inviting us here. This is just such an important thing to discuss, especially for the people in Massachusetts. And our executive director, Michael Bobbitt, sends us regrets. He is actually in Washington, D.C. right now, meeting with the National Assembly State Arts Agency, discussing this very topic right now. So this is an important topic, and to your point, and to Dr. Trent's point about the economic impact and the loss of the grants, we're hearing about the loss of grants from all of our constituents, all of our grantees. It's really unsettling to hear the issues that's going to be coming down the road because of the loss of the grants. Massachusetts, if people aren't aware, Massachusetts has 133,000 people in the creative arts sector, and that generates $29 billion worth of economic activity. And so,
say the number again?
29 billion.
That's what it'd be.
29.7 billion of economic activity, and so that comes in the forms of people actually going to cultural events, as well as while they're in town, while they're in Boston, they may be going to a restaurant, they may be staying in a hotel. So all of that economic activity is part of that $29.7 billion, and without the NEA funds, without that support, it's going to hurt our economy, and it's going to possibly threaten some of the jobs, some of the 133,000 jobs within that sector in Massachusetts. So this could have really
devastating
impact.
Good morning, I'm Bethany Steiner. I'm the Public Affairs Director for Mass Cultural Council. We are the state's arts agency, and it's our job to bolster and support the arts communities and spaces. And we do that in grant making and cross-sector partnerships and making folks aware that the cultural sector is here, it's vibrant, and it's important. And not only are we 4% of the Commonwealth's GDP every year, supporting those jobs that the chair talked about, and bringing in that almost $30 billion. We are as big as transportation, we're as big as construction. We're an important economic engine here in Massachusetts. But we're also, as you said, Congresswoman, the humanities is our history. And people need to understand and learn from what happened before to make good decisions now. By learning and embracing arts and culture and having creativity centered in education for our children and in all of our everyday experiences, that helps us make good decisions, it helps us be innovative, it helps us be vibrant, and it helps our communities thrive. So we really appreciate you continuing this conversation. We really believe in the power of culture and coming together and supporting really more and more that all of these museums and cultural organizations and creative individuals are doing every day across Massachusetts.
Thank you. Dr. Gaither, thank you for joining us today. You know, we're all in awe to be proximate to you. And you know, honestly, I don't know if I have a guided question for you, Doctor, because I just want you to say whatever you want to say. Okay. Teach the people, Doctor. Teach the people. What do you want to say?
One thing I want to say is we have to refuse to be reduced.
Yes.
To educate people is to make them larger. And by their becoming larger, they become more impactful, more productive,
That's right.
more knowledgeable of themselves.
Yes.
The institutions that we represent, museums, schools, other kinds of institutions, have a unique role to play because we have no shortage of brilliant people with great ideas.
Right.
But they all have limited lives. Those of us who work in institutions do that because institutions can live beyond us, past us, strengthening them and putting them on a path that goes somewhere really matters. Elma Lewis, who founded the National Center of Upward Art and Artists, used to always say the arts are the guts of the people, by which she meant the very substance from which all the energy gets made and all the difficult and sweet things get reconciled, come from that digestion. And we're in that. Government has a unique role to play in this because our country is founded with such inequities that the only real hope we have of balancing some of those inequities is by making more just government. So when we look and see all face lives passing as history, we have to say institutions like the Smithsonian must burn in their souls, because Smithson said in the earliest discussion that here is a place about the increase of knowledge. And you can't increase knowledge by lying. So I think we have to firmly assert a commitment to not being reduced, to not accepting being made footnotes in a story for which we're not only integral,
Right.
but transformative.
Yes.
There is no American story without us. And that us is all of
All of
us.
us.
So I think we have to constantly look for how we pick up the next piece of the fight and resist this diminution of who we are and lift up not just who we are, but who we can become and what world is possible for our progeny. So I think that's what we must commit to. And every gathering like this is an opportunity for us to focus our tools and to direct our weapons towards the enemies of progress.
Ready to go? He does this every time. That's why I said no guided question. You know, we're always transfixed. You know, when we're in your presence, that voice, which is, you know, is our own local sort of James Earl Jones. You know, in that way. You know, thank you for that eloquent articulation and defense of our museums, of these essential cultural institutions, and the need for us to have an accurate telling of our history. And that is to the benefit of all of us.
Yes.
That is to the benefit of all of us. We all benefit from a citizenry that is informed, that is educated.
Precisely.
Yes. Okay, refuse to be reduced. Wonderful. Thank you. Lydia, thank you so much for joining us. Do you mind just saying your name and affiliation?
So I'm Lydia Lowe. I'm from the Chinatown Community Land Trust. What am I doing here? I guess I was honored to be added to the Boston Commemoration Commission and as a sponsor of the Immigrant History Trail and 4 worker statues in Chinatown, which are attempting to lift up the long history of immigrant workers in general in that neighborhood and the Chinese American contributions to building the city and the country in particular. And as an Asian American, I just feel it's so important for me to be here. Whether we are talking about Asian American history in particular, I think that, I would not be doing what I'm doing today if it were not for me learning about African American history. It was learning for the first time about the Black Power movement that inspired me to go look for the Asian American movement. And I think it's because we need to see that we are part of that American story, exactly as you're saying. It's something that we didn't grow up with, at least not during my time. I'm a little on the older side. It has been so inspiring to me to participate in this Boston Commemoration Commission, which is really reinterpreting what the 250th is all about, what the 400th anniversary of the city is all about, and really looking into all of the untold stories. So, for us to be now facing this, just when we're about to take the first step, facing that attack, it's so important, as you said, Congresswoman, to be fighting back in this moment, because it's not just about waiting for this administration to pass. This is a litmus test for what's going to happen in the future, and I'm so honored to be here with you all.
Thank you, Lydia. And again, I'll just reiterate that, empirical facts are not ideology. And so, assertions that that the administration would like to stop indoctrination, and in fact went on to say that we cannot raise children in a country where they grow up to hate themselves. What an incredible irony that then you would work to actively whitewash, censor, rewrite history. How many children will grow up with not a full sense of agency and awareness of their own self-determination and actualization without access to that history? It is a transformative experience. But again, we know, although this is a moment acutely where the defunding and dismantling and the action of this administration, this hostile administration, are harmful, but that many of you were already operating in deficits and not with investments that are commensurate to your impact. And so I wonder if anyone else would like to expound upon either this moment and the chilling effect of that and what you were seeing and experiencing from philanthropy, from the private sector. Do you see any changes in recent years where maybe at one point there was a more robust commitment and investment and that has waned or changed, and what would you attribute that to? Again, talking about the impacts of cuts in NEA funding and the impact of this executive order. I should also say that we were very intentional about who was invited. There were many, given the quick turnaround, and couldn't join us today. But I have to be honest and say there are also people that are fearful. Part of this chilling effect is to create a situation where people are afraid to fight back, are afraid to organize for fear of putting an even bigger bullseye on their back, given this culture of grievance and retribution. So I do just want to acknowledge that. So I'm going to be much more strident because I have the bandwidth and the luxury to do that. But just know that there are others that wish they could be around this table but are fearful to do so. So again, I thank you for creating the space. But would anyone else like to expound upon either the impact of this executive order, the impact of cuts in NEA funding, or just anything else as we round up the conversation?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this particular executive order doesn't exist in isolation, that it exists within the other executive orders. And that has had an impact in creating instability across the country. And that instability has made people cautious.
So it's layered with the executive orders around the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and now this restoring truth and
Your
sanity.
colleague's letter from the Department of Education. All of us are trying to stabilize and navigate what this truly means. And what I will say is that as these were coming out, especially in the month of February, which is Black History Month and a major revenue generator for us, we saw a downturn. And I'm not clear on what that was exactly, but I do think that it's a lack of clarity, clarity of impact, because we do have to be considerate of the fact that some people have government contracts. So they were trying to understand, does a facility rental with us impact your ability to continue your government contracts? Does it impact your ability to receive additional funding or support? And so, and people just were bewildered, right? There's so many things happening. I know from my colleagues across the country that all of them are experiencing what I'm experiencing, but they're not free to speak. And I'm in an incredibly privileged and blessed position to have the support of you, Representative Pressley, Mayor Wu, Governor Healy, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, Boston City Council, who have said
I
that.
don't know what to tell them tonight.
Oh, yeah.
We're incredibly blessed and privileged to have that level of support because we know we can step out a little bit further and make some statements because our community values us. But that's not the case for everybody. And so we're all navigating, and right now, I'm in talks with foundations all the time. They care a lot about us, but they're inundated across the board. We're all turning to them. And so what has happened for the nonprofit sector, especially in the Commonwealth, is the nature of how we operate has changed. And we're not clear what that change is. And we know that the foundations are doing the best that they can in a very, very difficult situation. And we're incredibly grateful for the support we can get them. But this has created a significant change in how we operate and how we'll be able to navigate through this moment.
Thank you,
I
Madam
think
Chair.
there's some
Yes.
reason for having real concern about some changes that may be coming down the pike. There is a general tendency in fundraising for foundations and other non-government sector supporters to align with government. So if governmental agencies that are supporting things contract, then the whole scene contracts because that prism slowly becomes accepted. And the long frame of this, when the Carter administration, at the beginning of the 70s, there was a very wide spectrum of support that came from the endowments for the arts and the endowments for the humanities. In 1980, when the Reagan administration came in, that all started to change. I'm intimately familiar with it because I worked on the committee with A.D. Spellman in the days when there was a commitment that was clear at the federal level to supporting sectors that had never received proper support in the whole of the thing. What happens over the period after that is support is increasingly for the previously privileged. So those who already had a lot got more, and those who were working in situations where they had to go out and find much smaller amounts to deliver the service that they gave got less, or they got relayed so that someone else got the money in between, and then they got it passed down. That's another piece of the kind of reduction that I referenced earlier. I think we all have to be on guard to try and make sure that that does not happen again. Massachusetts is brilliantly represented in that it has resisted this kind of diminution. But this kind of diminution is there and in play. And you see it in what is in effect a kind of resurrection of a certain white nationalist point of view that is underneath everything and saying this is a Christian nation and this is the framework, and if it doesn't come through this frame, let's figure out how to cut the legs off.
A monoculture.
So we have to really be vigilant to say that we are total people, that we're not just some folk, and that we're not an ideology. We're a wing of the whole of humanity, and that's not subject to reduction to ideology. The truth is always complex, big, and internally contradictory. And when people turn up with simple answers that basically amount to cutting this back and cutting that off, we know on the face of it that's untrue. And we should resist it.
Thank you, Dr. Gaither, and thank you for pointedly calling out the white nationalism aspect here, because one of the most disturbing parts, and if you haven't read the executive order, I encourage you to do so, but in it, Donald Trump recounts that race is not a social construct, that it is biology. And that is, in fact, the same belief system of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
And so, thank you, Doctor. I do want to hear from our mayor as we talk about the new norms that we're navigating, and a reflexive response by people to pull back in their commitment. Since your time on the city council, you've long championed arts and our cultural institutions. I wonder if you might take a moment there to speak to the way you see this, and in your own vigorous defense in these perilous times. And I should say, to Dr. Trent's point about the dismantling of the funding of diversity, equity, and inclusion, aims to dismantle the Department of Education, the attacks on the Smithsonian, that residual and chilling effect, to Dr. Gaither's point as well, even if museums remain open, they're being degraded. They're being degraded and they're being eroded. And these are supposed to be non-partisan, independent entities. And the Smithsonian in particular has some 200 affiliates throughout the country where you are sharing research and exhibits. And so again, even if a physical space remains standing, these efforts seek to really degrade, erode, and undermine what can happen in those spaces, which is the same thing as shuttering them. But Madam Mayor, and I welcome Clerk Cartwright and Council President Lucille Shum. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for convening us, and thank you, Dr. Trent, for hosting us and for hosting so many of the most important moments in Boston's history. I also just want to, I'm tempted just to give all my time back to
Mayor Congressman say, I yield.
But I'm really struck by the reference you made to the guts and citing Dr. Emma Lewis, and that I think there's maybe an argument that the arts are not just the guts, but almost every other organ, like the heart, the brain, where ideas come from, the muscle. So arts and culture are powerful, and there's a reason why one of the first acts that President Trump did was to move to take over the Kennedy Center, or to reinstate his own MAGA allies there. That is how we understand who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going, and who belongs in that journey of what is still ahead. So it's just unthinkable in many ways where we are. As Lydia referenced, this period of time was always going to be one where Boston was standing out in the 250th commemoration, in the lead up to our 400th anniversary as a city, but now we're really going to have to stand out and to fight back. I hope that we've also heard similar thoughts from other cities that Dr. Trent was describing about at least having hope to point to other people who could can speak and feel a bit more empowered to say what needs to be said. So I would just urge any institution who has a platform, any leader of any kind of company, nonprofit, organization, whatever role you have, each one of us getting involved and expanding the circle of who's speaking out and how we are linking arms. I hope it makes it a little bit easier and bigger for all of us. I know that's what we're trying to do with our Boston Family Days program as well, so I'm really, really grateful that so many institutions across the city are joining in our effort to set a new paradigm where it's the role of city government in Boston to provide the support and the partnership hand in hand with our cultural institutions to open the doors, because everyone has, in some ways, a birthright to the history, the wonder, the ideas, the experience of seeing something new, being exposed to different cultures and different ideas, and the beauty and the marvel that can only come from putting yourself in new and sometimes challenging situations. That is what arts and culture are for, in part. So we are doing what we can. We hope that other sectors will continue to align with government in some ways, but just at the city level and just in Massachusetts at the city and state level and with our federal delegation. So thank you for helping to build and strengthen and fuel the coalition work that has been happening in the Boston, Massachusetts area for a long time. It's been a lot of work with the MCC and Boston Creates and many efforts over many years where our cultural landscape, I think, is not only individually filled with superstar institutions, but collectively connected in a way that I don't know is the case in every other community. We need to keep that going, and now there's another motivation to keep that going, but I'm so grateful to all of our institutions and all of our leaders who have been building the groundwork to prepare us to be in the best moment right now.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, thank you for your consistent pushback during these deeply consequential times on those things that we hold most dear in this assault on our history and assault on the freedom to learn. So we've just been talking about the cultural and educational and economic impact of our arts and cultural institutions. We're coming together today prompted by a call to action, a demand by myself and my colleague who co-chairs the Museum Caucus in the House of Representatives, Paul Tonko of New York, to demand the Inspector General of the Smithsonian do an investigation. He's constitutionally required to respond to our congressional inquiry, so sort of conducting oversight, if you will, to better understand the implications of Trump's executive order on the Smithsonian, established in the 1800s as an independent, nonpartisan, entity. And of course, this is the prompt for our convening, but it's also an opportunity for us to lift up the cultural assets in the Massachusetts 7th and to ensure that we are not only doing everything to preserve the Smithsonian and its 200 affiliates, but our cultural institutions right here at home. So, Councilor Durkin, anything that you'd like to offer about the museum, or what's keeping you up at night when it comes to the assault on these critical assets?
There's so much that's keeping us all up at night, but I just want to say thank you so much to Congresswoman Pressley, thank you so much to our mayor. The City Council stood together to stand with the museum, and I'll just say that I live on the Black Heritage Trail, and I take that as a deep honor that we're standing in an institution that has had so much history, and Dr. Trent has stated that earlier, just how much happened in this very room. And that's a deep responsibility that we all have to make sure that we are expanding access to these opportunities and not limiting access to these opportunities. And District 8 has a lot of wonderful institutions. I think the ones that have reached out to me the most, the West End Museum, and obviously this very place where we're standing. But it's so important that, especially smaller institutions that offer very niche services and very important work that they do, places that, and information that without being able to access these opportunities, you are missing out on a piece of our cultural history and our community's history. But that's exactly what this administration is trying to do. They are trying to limit the amount of information that our communities have about our cultural heritage and who built it. And I'll just say, I stood at the beginning of Black History Month with General Woody Woodhouse at the City Council right after this administration's attack on people being able to know the history of the Tuskegee Airmen. General Woodhouse is a constituent of mine in Mission Hill, grew up in Roxbury. His history and the history of everyone who served with him is our history. And without us having, it's just executive order after executive order that is an attack on who we are as a people and our connections and how we know each other and how our histories are intertwined. And that attack in itself is something that at all levels of government we need to be standing up against. And it's just a real honor to stand here with our president of the City Council, Rusu Louisian, the first Haitian American person representing Boston on the City Council. Our histories are intertwined, and I think all of these attacks are really just, they're trying to make it seem as if our destinies are not intertwined, as if our communities don't need access to this vital information that connects us all. And I think it's a real shame, and that's what keeps us all up at night, and I'm just so grateful for both of your leadership.
Well, thank you for your partnership in your defense. And, President Lujan, thank you for being here, and would love to hear, I know personally as well, your commitment to our shared history and a celebration of our arts and cultural institutions. So anything you would like to contribute?
Well, I just want to start off as a contributor by just giving you my thanks, Congresswoman, because they are obviously politically zoned and it is hard to keep up, but you are kept a steady pace with pushing back, and for that we thank you. Mayor, we thank you for the way in which you've been pushing back. I just came from also celebrating adult education for our immigrant communities and how we can care, our calling is to care for each other and to preserve our history. Dr. Shred, may you forever be indefatigable in the way that I know that Dr. David, that you are, because we are in for a fight. There is no better, even on the hardest days of this administration, whenever I walk into a room and see a bunch of older Black women, they remind me, child, we've been here before. And that to me is the only thing actually that has provided me with some solace during these crazy, crazy times. So may we lean on the resilience and of the perseverance of the ancestors who worked to give us places like this, when systems shut them out. When systems like, you can't teach your kids here, when we had to by no other option create spaces and places for ourselves, for education, and to teach one another. And so just know that you have it outside of Boston City Council, as Councilor Durkin said, allies, you have in our mayor and everyone here to support this museum, to support our Blacksonian down in DC, which is so incredibly important that we do that. And I was gonna say, we had an event here in, I think it was February, during Black History Month, and a woman came, Black woman from Dorchester, she came and she stood up and she said, I never knew Beacon Hill was for me. I never knew my story was here. And she started tearing up, talking about what it meant for the first time to come to this museum. We will protect that at all costs. We will protect the ability for people to see themselves in all parts of the city. And for us to do whatever we can to protect this museum, this trail, make sure you get the funding you need, the support you need, and I know Congresswoman, you're doing that at the federal level, and everyone around this table is doing their part to make sure that we can push back against the monstrosity that we are seeing coming out of this administration every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Hi, first of all, as with everyone else, I deeply appreciate all the hard work you're doing on our behalf, Congresswoman Pressley, and you as well, Mayor Moore. So thank you both for being such stalwarts in fighting for what is right, what is just, and trying to preserve our history. Part of my background is in history. I have a master's degree, well, I should say I earned a master's degree in American Studies. I worked, my first professional career was with the Michigan Bureau of History. So I deeply understand and appreciate what history means. And I absolutely, you struck a chord with me. We were talking about, Councilor Durkin, how we are intertwined. And I believe at this point we are so intertwined that no matter what the current administration tries to do, you're not going to break those ties. And what is happening now, hopefully, is that we will only strengthen us to fight more. The history, you cannot simply erase it, not at this point. We have come too far, we have fought too hard, and this will not go away. And thank you for holding this particular meeting that shows people we're not going anywhere. We will fight you, and we are a powerful force and a powerful voice when we come together. So thank you for bringing us together. And I will do whatever I can in my capacity to ensure that the history does live on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is a shared history and a collective movement. Any final thoughts or words from Lydia or Mass Cultural Council?
The quote that I keep thinking about in this moment is actually a James Joyce quote, which is, "History is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake." And I think that the preservation of, a broad understanding of our history and all of our stories is so important for us to not repeat all of the mistakes of the past and to be able to move forward into the future. It's all about fear. So whether it's like a specific grant that's cut or not, I don't think our work is advanced enough to be impacted by the federal grants at this point. But, it's the atmosphere of fear that's being created about, educators, feeling that this is something they can't talk about, that's something that they can't talk about, our institutions. And that fear, it's in the context of the fear that's happening, on all levels, the fear that immigrants are facing, about just going out on the street and not knowing, even if you're legal, whether ICE is going to take you into detention. I know that we have been talking about doing exchanges and going to conferences with, our colleagues in Canada and the UK, and, people are deciding we can't travel because of the fear of going through customs, and so all of this is, will have an impact if we don't stand up. And that standing up, the way in which you are really leading us, in fighting back, it is going to make the difference in whether we push back that big right-wing, white supremacist movement or not.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about movements because, as I'm looking to sort of distill a linear path forward during this period of immense turbulence, I'm looking back, for notes. So those lessons learned from Seneca Falls, those lessons learned from Selma, those lessons learned from Stonewall, so it is a shared history. It is a collective movement and pushback here. And again, this is what is frightening people. If you have an accurate telling of history, then it belies your logic that everyone is advanced in this country simply by hard work. You have to acknowledge the ways in which systemically the disparities that exist today were created by injustices of the past. And that is not what this administration wants. Again, they want a citizenry that is ignorant and uninformed, that is indifferent to the suffering of their neighbor, and that is inactive. So I thank you all by your actions every day, and in being here today, and being an affront to all three of those things. Thank you for being here. A special thank you again to Dr. Trent and the Museum of African American History for hosting us. It is great to be here, not only as Congresswoman for the Massachusetts 7th, but also as someone who married the love of my life in this very sanctuary almost 11 years ago. That was one of the happiest days of my life. But today, I stand here in a somber moment of urgency. We're witnessing a direct attack on our nation's history, on our shared history. Donald Trump and this hostile white supremacist administration are trying to erase our shared history and the documented stories of marginalized communities, attacking institutions like the Smithsonian's American Art Museum, American Women's History Museum, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, also known as the Blacksonian. These attacks are about more than museums. They are about silencing our voices. They're about erasing our contributions and denying the truth of who we are as a nation. And when I say that this administration is anti-Blackness on steroids, I mean it. But here in Boston, we stand firm. Our museums, our cultural institutions are the keepers of our collective history. They preserve the stories of struggle, of triumph, of resilience, and of brilliance. As you just heard, we convened this listening session to highlight the incredible work of these cultural institutions, to quantify and humanize the impact of these disastrous policy and budgetary decisions made by this White House, and to make it plain to anyone and everyone that Black history is American history, women's history is American history, AAPI history is American history, LGBTQ plus history is American history. And in fact, in this very moment of resistance, this is American history. No amount of censorship or whitewashing will ever change the contributions that have been made. To be clear, this harmful executive order and funding cuts hit home for us. So while my colleagues and I will hold this administration accountable for their attacks on the Smithsonian museums in DC, we know that the gems that we are lucky enough to that call the Massachusetts 7th their home, the Museum of African American History, the National Center for Afro-American Artists, the Immigrant History Trail, and the 4 worker statues are under attack here too. I'll let these partners and community builders speak to what is on the line if we don't stand up for our museums. But we are here at the federal, state, and municipal level to honor the contributions they have made, to stand up and to speak out. Because what I want fundamentally is for every single person to walk into our museums, from the Smithsonian's in Washington to the African American History Museum in Boston to other museums in Massachusetts and beyond, and see our collective accurate history on full display. And while we'll keep fighting from Capitol Hill to Beacon Hill to City Hall, I just want to encourage everyone to support these institutions. Come and immerse yourself in the exhibits and artistic expression that this White House is so hell-bent on erasing. These artists, curators, exhibits, and history contribute to not only the cultural soul of this city and Commonwealth, but to our local economies. We have their back, and they have our gratitude. And with that, I will invite Mayor Wu to the podium.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Pressley, for your continued relentless focus, protection of all of our communities, and your leadership in a moment where we very much need voices calling out what's right. I am so grateful to all those who joined the roundtable that you had convened. Thank you so much to our hosts here and all of the partners who spoke and shared their perspectives. I also want to, in addition to some of the partners that you will hear from, I also want to thank and lift up the colleagues in government who were part of this. So Madam Clerk Allison Cartwright, City Council President Ruti Lujen, and City Councilor Sharon Durkin, and all of our colleagues, thank you, as well as the leaders from the Mass Cultural Council, Chair, and thank you so much. We spoke about how the institutions here in Boston, even as we are standing united, are still having to face difficult, often impossible choices. We've heard of local nonprofit organizations who are now having to make a tremendous shift in how they plan out the financial sustainability of their operations. And here at this very museum, the impact's already being felt immediately, which I'm sure you'll hear in just a little bit. The City of Boston as well. Just last week, we joined a lawsuit against the Trump administration for funds that are relied on every single year to address housing instability and homelessness that now had come with provisions where if you sign on the line to access these annual funds, you'd have to commit to not serving and excluding specific populations, community members who are at the core of not just the work that we do, the services that we provide, but who we are and the values that we share.
And so we have pushed back. I'm very glad we were able to have, as the first step, a temporary restraining order against that set of conditions so far, and we will continue that fight and many others at the city level. And we are here to stand with all of our institutions. Boston has always been a community that has stood up, even when it was difficult, even when the political headwinds were pressing back against us, and we have reshaped the course of history. We are in the midst of our 250th celebrations as we mark the lead up to our country's birth, 250 years since our country's birth, and this city and this community's role in that. We are telling the full story of this community's role in that. And we will continue to tell the full story of this city's involvement in all the major social justice movements and fights to lift up and course correct our forward movement as a society and as a country. We know what the Congresswoman has been leading on is true across all of Boston's history. Black history is American history. In Boston, we know that erasing your mistakes only guarantees that you'll repeat them, and hiding parts of the truth you don't want to see isn't leadership, it's cowardice. Real leaders don't fear our history. We study it.
That's right.
And we make sure that everyone in our community has the access to be able to enjoy, be part of, and shape that history. So I'm so grateful to the institutions here in Boston who do this work and who have been part of making sure our country has access to these amazing treasures, reminding us where we've been, what we've done, and what work remains ahead. To undermine these institutions, these treasures, is to undermine the future of our country and the education of all of our community members. And we know what kinds of leaders don't want an educated public. But here in Boston, we've always subscribed to a different kind of leadership. One where we don't slash funding for education, innovation, research, and critical services and pretend that that is efficiency. One where we don't see diversity as a threat, but as our strength. And one where we don't lock the doors to our cultural institutions, we throw them open. So thank you to Dr. Noel Trent and the entire team at the Museum of African American History for being a part of our Boston Family Days program. As a reminder, this upcoming Sunday is one of the days where any child, any student growing up in Boston can come for free to this very institution and many of our treasures across the city for free with guests, family members, loved ones. Go check that out. We will see you here. We know that this is important to make the rich, complicated, truthful history that lives here available to our young people and to our families for free. I want to thank the Congresswoman for bringing us together. I want to thank everyone who has been standing up in this moment and everyone who has been making it a little bit easier for all of us to stand up collectively. Erasing the contributions of women, of immigrants, of the Black community is to erase our city's history, our country's history, and our shared future. And as you heard from everyone here today, we are not going to let that happen. So it is my deep honor to pass the microphone over to our host for today and a leader who has been standing strong and making sure that we are on the right path. Thank you so much, Dr. Noel Trent.
Thank you so much, Mayor Wu, Congresswoman Pressley. I'm Dr. Noel Trent, President and CEO of the Museum of African American History, Boston and Nantucket. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to one of our 4 historic buildings, the African Meeting House of Boston, built in 1806. It is the oldest existing Black church building in the country. This building was largely built by and for African Americans. Cato Gardner, a businessman of West African origin, raised money for this building. And right now you're standing on the floorboards that are over 200 years old. In essence, every person who walks in this building is literally walking in the footsteps of history. So as many of you know, with the executive order released on March 27th, it appears to be a directive specifically targeted at the Smithsonian and the National Park Service. However, as evidenced by the previous executive orders on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the Department of Education's letter regarding race and public education, the implications are far-reaching. On April 10th, we received official notice from the Institute of Museum and Library Services that our $500,000 capacity building grant, which would have funded school programming, was terminated. The letter cited our work no longer serves the interest of the United States. We respectfully disagree with that statement. Ma not only stands as a living testament of Black people who were not only present, but instrumental in the creation and advancement of this nation, but also reflects a long history of multiracial coalitions that fought for justice. Here, in the African Meeting House of Boston, the Massachusetts Colored Association, an early Black abolitionist group, gathered. Here, William Lloyd Garrison founded the New England Anti-Slavery Society, an abolitionist group that would shake the nation. Here, Frederick Douglass spoke. Here, people gathered despite their limited disposable time and money, with a belief that despite what the society said they were human beings and they had a voice. Here, ordinary people moved mountains. As an independent African American museum, we were founded by Sue Bailey Thurman, an activist who believed that in the midst of the civil rights movement, history mattered. This history mattered. We reflect the generations of people within the Black community who preserve the history through oral traditions, historic buildings, arts, and objects. The unwavering commitment of community historians and scholars, individuals like William Still and Zora Neale Hurston, who recorded people's stories and experiences. George Washington Williams, William Cooper Nell, Leah Amos Pendleton, Anna Julia Cooper, and others who wrote the first histories chronicling people of African descent in the Americas. And for more than a century, academic research has generated new scholarship on the African American experience, challenging the dominant narratives. Our story is not unique. We reflect the journey of culturally specific institutions across the Commonwealth and the country, whose story is rooted in the community and who've had a direct effect on who we've become as a country. The efforts we see today are designed to marginalize, demean, and destabilize this institution and others like us. We will not be erased. We will not be erased. We will continue to fight for the preservation, conservation, and interpretation of the contributions of people of African descent in New England, because this museum stands as a beacon of truth, resilience, and cultural pride. Yes. It is where people of every age and experience come to learn the real, often untold stories of African American struggle, triumph, and contribution to American history. We are grateful to the support that we've received from our elected officials, and we reflect on the quote by Frederick Douglass, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." We may live in uncertain times, but just as the Black communities of Beacon Hill and Nantucket persevered in the face of adversity, we too will press forward. We will not be erased.
And I'm certain that someone will document that on this day, Friday, May 9th, that people came together in 2025 in resistance to the second occupancy of Donald Trump in the White House. So this is a history-making moment as well as we stand on these wooden planks 200 plus years old. Now, someone who is living history, and a great scholar and luminary and just beloved by us all, Dr. Barry Gaither.
I direct the Museum at the National Center for Afro-American Artists, and I'm very pleased to stand here in absolute solidarity with the Museum of African American History and with the entire National Museum community that addresses the history, art, and culture of Black people. I'm reminded immediately of a quote from Orwell, who said, "He who controls the future the past controls the future. The meaning of that is what gets taught about yesterday is what our children learn in thinking about the tomorrow they will make. So if what's delivered to them is ignorance, then they cannot grow and express in their will the kind of future that ought to be theirs. All of us who are in the museum business are in the business of shaping futures because we use material of yesterday, but we mold it for the benefit of children tomorrow. And that common effort is the hope that we have to make a world different than the one that we're in at the present. So it matters that you've taken the noble act of bringing us together and allowing us to stand together and say we are one in addressing the mission of making a tomorrow that's worthy of our ancestors. And with that, we need to all commit to finding the resources and the support that will allow the sustained community of national museums that address Black history and subject matter to continue to make the vital contribution that we're making and to, in fact, make real that we don't submit, that we don't bow, that we go forward heralding the truth.
Thank you, Dr. Grayson. Lydia, from the Chinatown Community Land Trust, Lydia Lowe, who also joined us at the roundtable.
I was really struck by the, Dr. Trent pulling out that particular piece of the executive order that said that institutions like this are no longer in the interests of the United States. It is such, so much the opposite. And I think that it's so important to me personally as an Asian American that it was only through learning about Black history, it was only through learning about the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement that I came to see myself as part of the American story. And so it's so important for all of us in this moment to really understand that, this is what, and I'm honored to be part of the Boston Commemoration Commission. Thank you, Mayor Wu, for appointing me. And because, we're saying that in this moment of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, that this is a time for us to expand that story and really understand what are the untold stories of American history. So for us to be instead hearing from our administration, it's not our administration, but the administration, that this is a moment to be cutting back and not telling the truth anymore, it flies in the face of our ability to move forward as a country. So I just think that it's very important to be standing here with Dr. Trent, with the Congresswoman, with the Mayor, with everybody to take a stand for this institution, to take a stand for all of our stories which may not have museums yet, or which may not have entered institutions, but which we're looking towards the future to encompass us all, and to say that we're not standing for the fear that is being engendered by these millions of executive orders to say, this is what you can teach, this is not what you can teach, this is what is allowed to be part of the truth, this is not what's allowed to be part of the truth. You're allowed to be here in this country, you're not allowed to be here in this country. That is not what the United States is about, that's not what our story is about, and we have a lot of work to do for the future.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm eager to get to participate in the AI Frederick Douglass Immersive Exhibit here at the museum, which I'll be having that experience momentarily. But before we get on with the rest of our day, if there are any questions.
What can you and your colleagues do down in DC? You're in the minority. How can you push your agenda?
Specific to this issue?
This issue or any of the other issues you guys have been fighting about and having meetings about and hearings and roundtables about?
Sure. Well, on this issue specifically, again, the prompt for our convening today is a letter that I've led on to the Inspector General of the Smithsonian demanding an investigation into the impacts of Donald Trump's executive order. The Inspector General, again, many of them have been fired, but this is one of the few that remain standing. And so they will have to respond to Congress about the implications of this executive order. And again, it has a reverberating impact on the 200 affiliate Smithsonian throughout our country. So transparency, oversight, these are essential things for us to do. That work I'm doing in partnership with Paul Tonko, who chairs the Museum Caucus in the House of Representatives. So that is one thing that we're doing, and that letter, that prompt, is also an organizing prompt because, it is important that we are rejecting and resisting and organizing at every turn. But writ large for the Democrats, our defensive strategy is litigation. We are working to combat the lawlessness and the hostilities of this administration with the rule of law, which is why we have been winning a number of the federal court cases, because this is a rogue and lawless president. He's not trying to do anything, or occupant. He's not trying to do anything through the legislative process. He keeps doing these fast and furious executive orders, throwing one angry noodle after the next at the wall to see what will stick. But most of these are an abuse of power, which is why I continue to use aggressively my role in the Committee on Oversight to conduct real-time oversight so that the Trump administration knows that these abuses of power will not go unchecked. So the Democratic strategy is one of litigation. It is one of legislation. If you take, for example, these threatened Medicaid cuts, we have a discharge petition at the desk right now, which will force a vote. It's called Hands Off. Today we're saying hands off our museums, but we have a discharge petition which will force a vote, hands off Medicaid, hands off SNAP. The Republicans have been, they're cowards. They refuse to host town halls in their districts. I have constituents from their states reaching out to me because they can't gain access to their own member, like a 70-year-old hospice nurse named Mary, who wrote me because she can't get an answer from her own Republican representative, advocating on behalf of her autistic son, Sean, who relies on Social Security and Medicaid. She recently was told to report to the office. She's very concerned about what they'll tell her about those essential, those life-saving benefits. She says if Social Security and Medicaid are cut, it will be a death sentence for my son, who is nonverbal, who cannot be left alone, as it would be injurious to him. So they're running scared. And so we have to make them wear this harm, that people are very clear. You are living under, your life is in limbo. Your livelihoods are being threatened. Your lives are being disrupted and upended. People are being disappeared from your community. And who's responsible? Donald Trump and a cult of cowards, my colleagues across the aisle in the House, who are being complicit in this harm. So we have to make them wear it. And so we have this petition to force a vote, hands off Medicaid and SNAP. They said they won't vote for a budget that cuts Medicaid and SNAP. There are 80 million Medicaid recipients in this country. That is the only way they receive health care, for their asthma medicine, for their blood pressure medication, for prenatal care. It's the only way. So let's see how they'll vote. So our strategy is litigation, it's legislation, like hands off Medicaid, hands off SNAP, forcing them on the record, holding them accountable. It's agitation, and it is mobilization. And you see that from the Stop the Oligarchy tours with Senator Sanders and Representative Ocasio-Cortez, who have been in places like Idaho with tens of thousands of people showing up, who want a government that defends families and not billionaires. It's the hands-off rallies that we had here with 100,000 people in the city of Boston. So they're flooding the zone. We have to flood the zone. We have to match their energy, and we have to demonstrate that we do not accept this dystopian, dark, white supremacist vision that Donald Trump has for this country, that we do not accept it as an inevitability. And we will reject and we will resist it at every turn. And that's why we're here today, because the actions, this executive order, the Smithsonian executive order, as I said, it is anti-blackness on steroids. It has damning things in it, such as insisting that race is biological, that it is not a social construct. This is the same opinions of the Ku Klux Klan. And so we're here today in defense of Smithsonian's, but all of our institutions are artistic and cultural institutions. So we're doing everything because they're doing everything. Yes?
You're looking at proposing just complete elimination of the NEA and the NEA. Is that even possible? And what does it look like when you attempt to deconstruct an agency that funds so many organizations nationwide, especially in Boston, which we wrote about earlier this week? I mean, how would that impact? I think the conversation you also mentioned was they're all going to foundations. The foundations only have so much money. So if everybody's going to philanthropies, what does it look like?
Again, the majority of the actions by the Trump administration have been reckless and they have been lawless, which is why our best defensive strategy remains in the courts, and we continue to be successful in blunting a number of these harms, slow rolling them or stopping them completely. I'm so grateful not only to the leadership of our governor and our mayor, but certainly of our Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, who has joined a number of lawsuits in defense of our values and the constitutional rights of every person who calls this country home. So that remains our best defensive strategy. Again, most of what they're proposing is unlawful, but it still has a chilling effect. So whether it becomes a reality or not, as you see with the Smithsonian executive order by the Trump administration, the funding cuts, the content mandates, they have a significant trickle-down effect on local museums and cultural organizations across the U.S. So that is true for any issue. For example, the Department of Education, that is only Congress has the authority. You cannot just randomly stand up things like this so-called Department of Government Efficiency. Neither can you just unilaterally dissolve and dismantle federal agencies. You cannot do that. But what he is doing is slowly gutting, eroding, and degrading what those agencies can do. So even if the building still exists, if you're doing indiscriminate, massive layoffs of people, and you cannot reach anyone around your loans, or you cannot get help from Social Security, or you cannot access a grant, that is ostensibly the same thing as dismantling it. But it is unlawful. It is unlawful. And again, with this flood the zone strategy, this shock and awe strategy, they mean to overwhelm us in such a way that it becomes increasingly challenging sort of where the pressure points, because we're just having to fight to preserve and to protect everything. And as I said earlier, I do not think that this is just a fight for how do we weather the next 4 years. This will dictate, determine, and shape the next 100 years. And so to that end, I want to say, this is not only the work of 200 plus people in a Democratic caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. If this is going to determine the future for the next 100 years, this is the work of everyone. This is the work of any person of conscience who is afraid of being criminalized for suffering a miscarriage, who's afraid of being criminalized for reading a banned book, who's afraid of being criminalized for practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion, who's afraid of being criminalized simply for how they show up in the world. Everything is at stake in this moment, and it's going to require all of us to resist these daily and layered assaults.
I could just follow up.
Yeah.
In terms of just state and city affairs, I mean, litigation at the federal level is still moving, but it's effective.
True.
To your point, what do local folks then do if the organizations are just trying to get to that next grant? Right, if they were waiting for the end of the fiscal year for this money to come through, and that was not here, since the courts tend to move it slower.
Yeah. Well, I'll allow the mayor to speak more concertedly to that, but again, I don't accept anything that they offer as an inevitability. And so I'm just, the Democrats are, getting a lot of focus and a lot of attention, but what of my Republican colleagues who have abdicated their responsibility, who have ceded their power, who are being complicit in this wholesale harm? We could stop a lot of this. The Republicans only have a 2-person majority. So I'm just appealing to 4 Republicans of conscience. We can stop legislation to keep Elon Musk's grubby hands off your personal data. 4 Republicans of conscience. If we get 4 Republicans of conscience, we can stop Medicaid cuts. If we get 4 Republicans of conscience, we can protect our cultural institutions. So I would encourage people to lean on them, to demand and hold accountable all of your elected officials, and that includes my Republican colleagues across the aisle. But as for what do our municipal leaders do in this moment when they stand to be impacted by a deficit in federal resources, I'll leave that to our mayor to answer.
Well, we're not counting on any new grants from this administration. They've made it completely clear that they don't believe in government as a force for public good. They don't believe in public education. They don't believe in public health or science or so much of what Boston has stood for nearly 4 centuries at this point. We have, however, as cities across the country, through the census data and through congressionally appropriated funds separate from the ability of any individual with an executive order to remove, been relying on annual grants that are allocated directly to municipalities based on population and other factors like that. So the grants that we had received under the previous federal administration, we worked very closely and very thankful to our federal partners and our delegation for helping to codify those in legally binding contracts. So those would be solid. And again, there are still attempts to cancel and rescind and withdraw those, although they are against the law. The congressionally appropriated funds, we have similarly been going to court. And I mentioned one recently, the $48 million Continuum of Care grant. That is an annual way that we address homelessness and housing stability. And I want to thank the Attorney General also for having weekly huddles for municipalities around the Commonwealth as to what we're each facing and how we can collectively then be involved, get guidance on which grants to not apply for or how to read between the lines on different grant applications as we map out next steps. What is clear is that we cannot let the strategy of fear, confusion, divide us. That is, by design, the hope of, I believe, intimidating individual communities from speaking out so that they hope the next community will be the one to absorb the brunt of the impact. And conversations in this room over the course of history have taught us that now is the moment to stand up collectively. And so I'm so proud of not just our city and all the institutions here, but our representation at every level of government and our coordination across every coalition that we can build right now to say we are standing firm and we have each other's back because we're all experiencing the same thing. I wonder if any of our institutions want to say a word also on funding in particular. I'll defer to Congresswoman.
What I will say is this. Right now, our cultural and arts organizations need the community's support. We are facing perilous times. We are facing unprecedented times. And so if you care about us, if we have any significance in your heart, then we ask you to support us. And that support can be making a donation, that can be becoming a member, that can be by attending one of our programs or visiting. This is the time to show up for us because we need you. We cannot do this work without you, and we're holding these art, this object, this history for you. So now's the time for the community to step up for us.
It's a powerful and appropriate word, and the final thing that I would just add, building upon that appeal, because support is a verb. As we have seen with Harvard, I hope that courage is contagious and that the private sector and philanthropy will continue to do what Massachusetts, what Boston has always done, which is to lead, to be a pace setter. Because, yes, it's frightening to think about what can happen if you lead and what could be the blowback and what sort of retribution will this hostile administration project onto you. But it's more frightening to think about what we stand to lose if we allow them to pick us off individually. It's so important that we remain a united front in defense of our values. It's just really essential. So courage is contagious. And so what I would encourage people to continue to lead and to not retract your support, your investment, continue to be full-throated in your defense of our art and cultural institutions, and to robustly invest in them. Thank you.
Thank you.